Thank you, Gareth. If I could just pick up the screen share. The abridged title is Applying the Ironman Mindset at Work. And it is about grit and resilience. It's about overcoming adversity and recovering from it. And it's a way of thinking. It's not just a way of doing. So today I'd like to share with you how I think as an athlete, and then how I think also at work and in life, and how I think they can map across together. By the end of this session, I'm hoping you can take a few ideas away and also be more conscious of what's important in the way you think and work. So the main themes are going to be Kata, win, which actually stands for what's important now. I need to declare straight away, I'm not a top end triathlete. I'm better than average, around about average. But we want to talk about the focus of what's important now. Then on to grit and fortitude and resilience, Kaizen, the continuous improvement, and then Ikigai, the passion. Through these slides, there'll be a handful of pictures of me doing different triathlons, and I can talk to each one. So as in the introduction, I've done 20 of them now. And last year I was supposed to be at the World Champs, but of course, because of COVID, it was cancelled. And so I'm planning to do that in October this year, only 10 days before my 50th birthday, which was my goal. This weekend, I'm doing a half Ironman in New Zealand, and then a double iron distance race called Kiwiman, which is going to be the following week. That picture there is me exactly a year ago in New Zealand, Ironman New Zealand, finishing, which qualified me then for the World Champs. So if this has already been read out, products, agile coaching, project management, you know all of that. But the point I want to share here is, you'll see that third bullet point is that I do sell the idea of being an Ironman. I think it's very relevant and pertinent to the way I think and the energy I take to work. So what is an Ironman? Well, it's not Robert Downey Jr. Great movie though. It is a triathlon. It's a multidisciplinary race. It's 3.8k swim, or 2.4 miles on the swim, followed by 180 kilometers on the bike, or 120 kilometers bike biking, then a full marathon of a run. The fastest people in the world can do it in just under 8 hours. On a good day, I can come in just under 11 hours. So I'm midfield, not insanely fast. And so what goes through my mind when I race and how I train for racing is really what I'd like to share with you today. So the first theme is that of Kata. And you can see two pictures there. The first one, that's me in Lake Taupo, a big lake in the middle of the North Island of New Zealand. And I was just about to get going on a short distance triathlon. But the idea of Kata is this phrase here that was attributed to George Loomis, and it's something my swim coach used to always tell me, and still does. Don't practice until you get it right. Practice until you cannot get it wrong. And what he means by that is every year at the end of the season, so a few weeks from now, I'm going to go back to basics and start picking up swim drills and then repeatedly exercise those drills. Because over the season, when I'm racing, I can pick up bad habits. The neural pathways tend to blunt over time, and you need to sharpen that up again with deliberate practice. It's a neurological thing, even though it looks like it's physical movement. So within swim practice, most of my time is taken up doing drills. That picture below is Sensei Billy Higgins. He's an 8th Dan Shotokan instructor, and he coached and mentored and trained me in karate back in the 1980s. So Kata was something I was very familiar with, and I learned practicing karate back then, 30 years ago. And interestingly, I've just taken it up again. Now, there's an interesting thread through everything I'm going to talk about today, and that's Japanese words. You'll see a lot of them come up. And the reason is I studied Japanese management principles in the 90s. I'm really fascinated by Toyota and Japanese culture, and of course, karate. But a lot of what we hear from Japan is actually mapped from other places in the world. So, for example, Kaizen, which I'll talk about later, is inspired by training within industry in the US. So there are quite a few Japanese words I'll introduce today. So that's one thing I want you to take on board straight away. Don't practice until you get it right. Practice until you cannot get it wrong. So here's me. This was last week on the beach. So I have just taken up karate again. By the end of this year, I'm deciding to pick up another sport. So I want to get back into karate. So I'm doing a kata though. A kata is a series of movements in karate. It wouldn't be mapped perfectly to fighting. It's almost an art form or a presentation, a display. But the way you practice it is to constantly improve, constantly look at the form and repeat it again and again and again. I've got 3 books there that I'd like to recommend, and they all relate to this. Firstly, Peak by Anders Ericsson. And this book also, it made lots of references to Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers book. And you'll all be familiar with the 10,000 hours myth it is actually, because the studies that were done is 10,000 hours is important, a long time is important for continuous practice, but it has to be deliberate practice. And in fact, that was only about violinists in Germany, and they were about 23 by the time they did the study, and you wouldn't say they were expert masters of their craft at that age. But we want to look at deliberate practice. That is the big takeaway here. Daniel Coyle there, The Talent Code, a book I recently read, and he talks about the myelination of your brain. So you actually rewire your brain with recently discovered neuroplasticity. And then finally, Tiny Habits, or even Atomic Habits, is another book by James Clear. These books all intertwine and really is the theme that I want to share going through to how we apply it at work. So now you understand what kata is in karate, how I would apply it in swimming as a very technical discipline in triathlon. And I want to now talk about Toyota Kata. And Mike Rother, he won the Shingo Research Prize for this back in 2009. So it's quite an old book. But the point about Toyota Kata is it's slightly different to kata in sport. Kata in sport is about individual mastery, and Toyota Kata is about team mastery. Kata in karate is all about the physical movements. Toyota Kata is about the way we think. So we want to have that deliberate practice, so we start having that scientific thinking, the systems thinking, the lean thinking, the agile thinking, the way we think, the experimental mindset, probabilistic thinking. So it's all about thinking. And the way we rewire our brains to the way we think is through behavior. So to quote David Marquet, the submarine commander, act your way to new thinking, don't think your way to new action. So Toyota Kata is a lean approach, and it's basically modeled on the Toyota production system. And for example, there's a laminate card that you're given, and it asks these 5 questions. What's the target condition? Where do you want to see the process ultimately? What's the actual condition? Where are you now? So remember, in lean, you start where you are today. Which obstacles are going to get in your way? And therefore, what is your next step? So that's that PDSA or PDCA cycle, that iterative cycle to improvements. And then where can we go to actually see what we've learned? So these questions, and the point of Toyota Kata is you would follow it very closely until you've hardwired those thinking patterns. And then over time, you can then diverge away. So if 2 years later, you're still reading from the card I wrote, that's not good. But if 2 weeks later, you develop your own system, then you haven't rewired your brain. So that's the point of Toyota Kata, and Kata is to rewire the way we think. So that was the first idea that I wanted to share with you. Next on to what's important now. This picture is me at Ironman Western Australia in 2017. And things went wrong on that day, I have to admit. Firstly, a shark was spotted in the swim, so they cancelled the swim. Then it was 36 degrees, and strangely, not swimming meant we started the bike hot. We were already cooking. There was a forest fire, so the bike was cut short, and I had a snake jump out on me on the run, and we were all really suffering. But the thing is, when you're in a race, in an Ironman, many things can go wrong. You can't control the weather, you can't control what's thrown at you. And to quote the voice of Ironman, Mike Riley, the only thing you can control is your attitude. And let's say, for example, I got a puncture. Luckily, I've only had a few in all of the years I've been racing. But if you get that puncture for a few minutes, that is part of the race. If it takes you 4 minutes to change that puncture, that 4 minutes is then part of the race. And we need to focus on what's important now. There's no point stressing about it or getting angry or throwing the bike or swearing or crying. You need to focus on what's important now. And there's a book, Wins, Losses and Lessons by Lou Holtz, who was a football coach in the US. And I actually learned this from an Olympic swimmer only a few weeks ago, actually. And it really resonated with me, because one way I think as an Ironman is just to focus on what's in front of me right now. If at the beginning of the day, I imagine how it's going to feel on the run, it's going to overwhelm me. When we take this to work, we need to do the same. So if we're in a meeting solving a specific problem, we need to consciously and cognitively remove all of the thoughts. So we have a very focused way of thinking. And of course, focus is one of the values of Scrum. And in fact, if you know theory of constraints, Eli Goldratt says the essence of theory of constraints is focus. It's about effectiveness, not doing that which you ought not to do. So I'd like to share what's important now. Now, here's a case study for you on this. Let's talk about Ironman Hawaii. This is the World Championships. And the thing about Hawaii is lots of thorns on the road, and you're always at risk of getting a puncture. Two defending world champions, Norman Stadler, German, in 2005. So he won in 2004, and he was defending the title in 2005. And Chrissie Wellington, so she won in 2006 and in defending in 2007. Now, in both cases, you can actually go online and see the videos from both. Stadler had 2 punctures and only had 1 tube. And you see the video of him going into, as the commentator said, DEFCON 4. He was in meltdown. What to do? You've got no tyres, you can't have any outside help. His day was over. And he gave up, but not before throwing a bit of a tantrum. On the other hand, a few years later, Chrissie Wellington, and she was interviewed about this, saying preparation for Ironman is not just physical, it's mental. What happened to Chrissie is that she allowed her CO2 canister to gas out into the air, and then she did it with a second canister. So all of a sudden, she'd fixed the tyre, but she had no gas canisters, so she couldn't pump her tyre up. Instead, she focused on, what can I do about this? Well, luckily, the officials got word up the field for people behind her, and one of her competitors actually threw her a spare gas bottle, and she filled up, and then she overtook her, and then she won. And that's the difference. Now, it's not really fair to compare both, and it could be said that Chrissie was inspired by what Stadler did. So Wellington saw what happened a few years before, and so she obviously reframed what to do if there is a puncture. You can get aid from other athletes, it's just you can't get aid from other people. So the thing is, there is always a solution, but if you get into a cognitive tunneling way of thinking, you're unlikely to think of outside the box. We can apply this at work, and so many times people get locked into a singular way of thinking and get stressed about and become overwhelmed. So what's important now? That's the second thing. This talk is about grit and resilience, and I can tell you, Ironman hurts. It really does. And for me in particular, I've got this condition called Morton's neuroma. So when I run, sometimes the nerves inflame in my feet, and it is 8 on the pain scale. It really is painful. But, you know, pain calluses the mind, and I really think that I can take this with me. What would Goggins do? David Goggins, Can't Hurt Me. It's a great book, and I really recommend it to you. Now, just before Christmas, I was going to do a double half Ironman. And a few days before, I was just doing a simple swim run on Takapuna Beach here in Auckland. And I slipped in a hole in the water and rolled my ankle. I really thought I'd broken it. But I really wanted to do this, what's known as a sufferfest. So I said to myself, what would Goggins do? And I did the first day, but then pulled out on the second day, because pain is good, but it's always good to know when to pull back. And this is the difference between having the grit and resilience and tenacity and carrying on when you're not to. You need to know when to pull out. So always bear that in mind. But David Goggins tells a great story in his book. I mean, he ran an ultramarathon with a broken shin. I think it was a tibia that he broke, and he carried on running and did an ultramarathon. That guy is off the charts. There's nothing like him. I could never do that. But grit is important, and we can apply grit to work. But one thing to bear in mind is sometimes it's worthwhile letting go. If it's painful, then it might not be healthy. A few weeks ago, Ironman New Zealand was postponed, so it's actually this weekend, and I'm competing, but I should have been competing just over 2 weeks ago. Instead, I did the David Goggins 4x4x48 challenge. So that's 4 miles every 4 hours for 48 hours. So that's 12 sets of 4 miles, 48 miles. Which is about 77 kilometers, I think. So there's a picture of me every 4 hours as I went through. I just did it for fun. I was going to be racing that weekend. Why not? Make the best out of a bad situation. So in New Zealand, the Ironman was deferred, and that's what I did. So always try and think outside the box and what can you do differently. This is a brilliant book by Angela Duckworth. And one thing I want to pick up with grit, which I really picked up in this book, is about having the focus of a goal. If you know why you're doing something, if you have a long-term goal that you're aspiring to, that's good, but sometimes that can be too abstract and distant. So having a short-term goal can really help you. And to be really, really focused, have a daily goal. And if you have that daily goal, you'll have the grit, you'll have the resilience to carry on. So this book, The Power of Passion and Perseverance, and she does great TED Talks, is well worth the read. And I think grit and resilience is something we definitely need in our lives at the moment. We're very fortunate here in New Zealand, but around the world, there's a lot of adversity that you're all faced. So this is something to consider. Set yourself a goal. It really does help. Next, consistency over intensity. So here's a picture of me. This again was Ironman New Zealand in 2020. And you may not see it there, but it was the most painful. My Morton's neuroma was really firing up, and every 5 or so kilometers I was having to take my shoes off and massage my feet. It was really painful. So I didn't do a personal best. But consistency over intensity, what this is about is when we want to improve at work, and when I consider how I improve in Ironman, I don't do it as a big burst of energy. It has to be over the long period of time. It has to be little and often, and it has to be sustainable. So this is the essence of Kaizen. Now, if you dig into what Kaizen means, you may have heard change for good, and that's true. But if you look into the characters, it's actually changing oneself through the whip, so through discipline. And what we need to do is change ourselves first before we change others, and have discipline. And this is, again, through consistency, through deliberate practice. I just want to contrast Kaizen with Kaikaku and Kakushin. So Kaikaku is more of a transitional change. That's quite a big change, a transformation, if you will. There is time when that is relevant and important, maybe if I buy a new bike, or if we want to make a step change in what we're developing. And sometimes Kakushin, a brand new idea, is worthwhile. But all I'm suggesting here is we prefer to bias towards Kaizen. And that in the way of thinking of Kaizen is every time I train, I look at my data, I see if I'm improving. As I'm racing, even when I swim, every stroke, I ask myself, was my elbow lifted? Am I kicking well? Can I improve? So as I go through each part of the race, I'm continually trying to improve. And then at the end of each race, I do run a retrospective. But Kaizen is all the time. If you think of the Toyota production system, it's thousands of times a day. So Kaizen, Kaikaku, Kakushin. Intensity is not going to work for you all the time. Consistency will over time. And finally, another Japanese phrase, ikigai. And I hope this wraps it all together for you. Here's a picture of me and my wife. This was in 2017 again. This was the World Duathlon Championships. And the women's field start an hour before the men's field. So I spent the entire day, you can see there, 9 hours and 8 minutes. And I just caught up with my wife just at the finish line. And I think it's a great photograph. I'm blessed that I'm married to somebody who's equally passionate about this sport. And she's actually quite good as well. She qualifies to the world champs a lot more than I do. But ikigai is a Japanese concept meaning a reason for being. Now, you can build up upon your resilience and grit if you're working within your ikigai. If you're working on something that you're passionate about, you're going to carry on when others may give up. So ikigai is something that you love, something that the world needs, that you're good at, and what you can be paid for. So technically, Ironman triathlon isn't my ikigai at all. I'm okay, I'm average. The world may or may not need sport. It's up to interpretation, I suppose. I don't get paid for it, I pay. But I do love it. So I think my ikigai is that of a Kaizen coach. I present myself as a Kaizen coach instead of agile coach. And my ikigai is definitely in that domain, but I am certainly inspired by what I've learned as an Ironman triathlete. It has helped me think differently. So to take away as a summary, what I hope you've heard today is about deliberate practice, continual deliberate practice with consistency, continual improvement, but of yourself, discipline to continually improve what you're doing. That's the one person you've got control over. And the way you think, it's not just the way you behave. Find yourself your ikigai, find a passion and attach it to a mission, have a goal, set a goal. Have that resilience with a focus upon those goals. So goal setting is so, so, so important. And my final slide is to say thank you. Please follow me on LinkedIn. I have written about 5,000 words. It's just final editing of a PDF which deep dives into this and a few other attributes of what I've learned, with all of the references that I've made today. So please get in touch with me, and also I'm passing it on to the Business Agility Institute to send out. Happy to share it with anyone, because I believe these ideas are very relevant to the way we work and the way we live. Thank you.